Good. So we're 2 minutes in. Let me probably slowly but steadily start the session while we are still having people dropping back in. My name is Dario Heyman, founding member and chief research officer of Galen Growth, and I'm looking forward to walking you through our today's session of the Asia Pacific ecosystem update. I've got a few of my colleagues with me, so if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to drop them into the Q&A section. In case you have any particular questions that you'd like me to answer as part of the presentation, feel free to also drop them in the Q&A section, and I try to pick them up either by the end of the session or in between whenever I see that this fits nicely. So without further ado, let me share my presentation with you. This one. Okay, so as I said before, today we're focusing on the Asia PAC FY2021 update. In case you have not downloaded the report yet, you will find this either on our Galen Growth page in there under research, or otherwise you can also, in case you have an account within HealthTech Alpha already, you can simply download the report from there. They're all placed in there. It's significantly easier to download it. So once you have an account, head over to research on HealthTech Alpha, and you can just download the report from there. I'm not going to go into every single slide of this, but I do going to share with you a bit of the headlines from the ecosystem insights as well as the investment insights, and I'm then going to focus a bit more on the cluster and therapeutic focus area before deep diving into a bit of the categories that are very extensive this year in terms of both venture increase of the ecosystem or from a funding point of view. And I'm going to show you a bit of the noteworthy side, but I'm going to focus particularly on the partnership side and not so much on the funding side here, to just give you a bit of more of the flavor of how does the ecosystem develop last year as compared to the previous years. For those who joined us for the first time, I've seen many familiar names previously already, but for everyone who hasn't attended any of our webinars before and who hasn't met me, here, Galen Growth is basically the trusted advisor for many companies throughout the globe. We have an office, so we have offices in Singapore, Switzerland, in Basel, and in Japan. And we are working with pharmaceutical companies, medical device firms, insurance companies, governments, tech firms, and everyone else who's involved in the digital health space. They're helping them to tackle their problem statements and to find the right fit venture to enable to basically improve their ROI on digital health. We have a very strong team of experts within the space with lots and lots of decades of experience, either across the medical device side, pharmaceutical side, such as myself, or in the insurance space. And so if you have any questions, feel always free to reach out to us, and let's have a discussion around how we can also support your team in order to innovate your own pipeline. We have developed a platform that is called HealthTech Alpha. This is from where we are gathering all of our data. In case you've noticed it, we've launched our public version of the platform in September last year, where we are currently tracking more than 150 million data points across 8,600 digital health ventures in more than 45 countries. The database is expanding every moment or every time of the day. And as soon as we are picking up new ventures and we have verified the profiles, these ventures are also going to be available to you. It's primarily used to either find the right fit venture, to do your due diligence on a certain venture out there, or to simply provide an ecosystem insights to your team and to gather data around the same. All of the data that you're going to see in the next couple of slides are basically extractions from HealthTech Alpha. And in between, I also show you a bit how you can actually navigate between the pages within HealthTech Alpha to make your own analysis more efficient as well. We are publishing reports. In case you haven't seen some of our reports from last year, we've launched the Pharmaceutical Digital Innovation Index, a mental health report, an oncology report, a remote patient monitoring report, telemedicine reports, and many others last year. Do stay tuned and sign up to our newsletter. We are publishing these reports on a month-to-month basis, and in the upcoming months you will see many more reports coming as we are launching a new way how we are publicizing some of our data. As I said previously, we are actually now tracking 8,600 ventures out there. We have a total of roughly 28,000 entities that we're actively tracking. This is primarily from publicly available data, and we are aggregating all of the data, interpreting them, putting our layer of analytics over it, and are showing them to you in a more digestible manner. Okay, so without further ado, let me give you a bit of an insight into how Asia-Pac has developed last year. So similar to most of the other ecosystems out there, all of the other ecosystems out there, we've seen a major increase again in terms of funding, in terms of the value of the funding on a year-on-year comparison. Last year, about $8.7 billion of venture capital funding was deployed in digital health in Asia Pacific. This is roughly an increase of 27%. Again, what we've seen is that the deal volume has gone down by about 18%. This is majorly driven that you see the discrepancy here. Ventures are getting more mature, hence we are seeing larger ticket sizes. At the same time, there's a crunch of early stage funding, and therefore the venture volume goes down, and this is why you see the discrepancy here. We are expecting this to continue still for a couple of years until you probably have a baseline in terms of how many deals are getting deployed on an annual basis. When you compare now Asia-Pac to all of the other regions out there, especially to the US that has seen roughly a 2x increase year on year, Asia-Pac has seen a strong increase, but on the next slide you will find you will understand why it hasn't been as strong as probably expected from other people. Europe has seen a major increase on the backflow also of the US, as more investors are looking into Europe in the market as well and are trying to deploy their capital in other regions as well. Here we've seen a 3x increase roughly, 2.5x to 3x increase, and also the Middle East has expanded nicely and now crossing for the first time the $1 billion mark, which we have not seen before. This is primarily driven by Israel, obviously, whose solutions are primarily deployed also in the United States, and therefore it's not a surprise that you see an increase here as well. So when we look into Asia-Pac and into all of the regions, China still stays on top when it comes to all of the funding that is getting deployed. If you, however, compare the funding distribution to 3, 4, 5 years ago, where China roughly corresponded for about 80% of the funding, we now see that India picked up a major share of the total funding that has been invested here, with almost $2 billion invested, representing 22.3% of the entire value share. China also went up, however, not as strong, and therefore in comparison with the expansion of the other ecosystems, the value share actually decreased year on year. Australia now is the third largest ecosystem with 5.6% of the total value share, a total of roughly $500 million that has been invested, then followed by South Korea, and Singapore continues on the 5th spot. Hong Kong actually increased quite strongly last year. That was primarily driven by one funding round in one venture that has been quite significant. Otherwise, we would have expected Hong Kong, because of all of the turmoil that is currently going on within the country, to decrease as well. Japan has been the only, Japan and then Malaysia have been the only two countries that the funding actually decreased on a year comparison. This might gonna get taken up this year again. Japan started with a very strong January already, so we can expect that funding in 2022 in Japan is gonna increase again and therefore outpace 2021 quite significantly as well. When we look into the ecosystem overall, just looking into private ventures across Asia Pacific, this one has been increasing quite strong on a 5-year comparison. We've roughly seen a 7% increase year on year on average, going up from roughly 1,640 ventures now to almost 2,000 ventures that are private, taking into consideration all of the public ventures. Asia Pac now currently crosses the 2,100, 2,200 mark. This represents roughly 30% of the entire ecosystem of digital health ventures on a global scale. So it's still it's still the second largest ecosystem on a volume basis as compared to all of the other regions out there. Only North America is stronger. Europe has the third spot, and Middle East has the last spot in our current assignment. During the course of this year, we will also start publishing reports about LATAM. So you will start seeing that there's going to be a bit of a shift in terms of the volume of what we are showcasing, especially in our H1 report in 2022 now. When we look into how mature ventures in Asia Pacific are, generally when we are working with our clients, we are generally saying, do look out for ventures that are within the Series A stage already. Most of the ventures in seed funding stages are not having a ready product yet on the market. And therefore, you roughly want to always look for the ventures that have already exceeded or have already outpaced the early stage. So when you look into ventures that have been incorporated in 2018 or 2017, you already see a very strong share of ventures that have already exited the early stage. So they have a good product market fit. They have already clients acquired, and they've already raised at least a second funding round. And here we see them in 2017 as an example, roughly representing 40% of the entire ecosystem. So, so when you're looking for partners, do always look out for ventures that already have a bit more maturity. And especially when you are looking into how young are they, you can make clean cuts. Okay, the venture got just incorporated in 2021. Yes, the solution might look nice, but my risk in order to engage with this venture is still fairly high, considering that there's not such a strong product market fit yet available, or not a proven solution out there. When we look into regulatory approvals, considering that we are very deep within the material, we start tracking data that are going beyond what other people might also show you. Looking into the regulatory approvals out there, we've seen that 30% out of the 156 approvals that have been received in Asia Pac in 2021. The majority of them are medical diagnostics and patient solutions. Here, patient solutions includes, for instance, software as a medical device solutions. Medical diagnostics can be either your genomic testing, or it can be a diagnosis tool, let's say an AI algorithm that is interpreting medical images. These are under the medical diagnostic sides. Remote monitoring includes generally devices that can be used for remote monitoring. Therefore, it's not a surprise that these three categories actually correspond to the lion's share of all regulatory approvals that have been received. When we're comparing this on a global scale, Asia Pac is only the third strongest market in terms of regulatory approvals. However, do need to keep into consideration that you do have lots of markets in Asia Pacific that are yet unregulated. And therefore, it is a venture doesn't require a formal regulatory approval from a certain market in order to publicize their product there. The regulatory approvals that we are actively tracking in Asia Pacific are in Australia, Japan, South Korea, China, Hong Kong, India, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia at the moment. So this is from where these regulatory approvals can be retrieved. When we look into partnerships, it's also quite an interesting share here. Asia Pacific actually corresponds to roughly a third out of all partnerships that have been closed last year, with 531 active announced partnerships out there. The majority were here between medical diagnostics, similar to what I shared before. It's medical imaging or genomics companies. Health management solutions are generally solutions that are very hospital-centric, or that can be very physician-centric, and therefore these partnerships are often between hospital chains, for instance, private and public hospital chains, and digital health ventures and patient solutions. Again, it's your digital therapeutics sort of solution. Research, again, is also quite a significant one here with roughly 10%. This is very often either a strategic partnership with, for instance, a pharmaceutical company. It can also be more of an academic partnership in order to run, for instance, a clinical trial, or to do any other sort of engagement with academia. When we look into the funding events and here the large scale funding events, this actually decreased for the as compared to 2020. So the value share of all mega deals that have been deployed, mega deals is anything that is beyond $100 million, has decreased as compared to 2020. This is largely driven, we haven't seen as many mega deals in China as expected. Some of the mega deals now that are coming more out of India, for instance, and therefore the share here is still lower, considering that the value of the deals in India are still not as strong as the value of the deals that are happening in China. So with an increased sophistication of the solutions and an increased dollar raise per venture also across Southeast Asia, we will start expecting also to have more mega deals happening within the region. This has already exceeded last year again. This has already exceeded 2020 again, but we're expecting that the number of mega deals is increasing on an annual basis quite drastically, similar to what we've seen also in North America. In terms of exits, we've actually seen a very strong pipeline of IPOs as well as M&As. M&As was largely driven, many ventures struggled under the pandemic environment, and therefore they had to consolidate and therefore sell their businesses. This is why we've seen roughly 100% increase year on year. In terms of IPOs, this is largely driven by now a new way to also list your venture. It's not a new way, but it was a very sexy way last year to spec, especially in the US, because there was lots of funding available, and therefore we've seen that there were lots of ventures that were kind of riding the same wave and trying to list their venture also on overseas markets as well. However, when you look into the public ventures, this is actually quite interesting to see here. Even the first quartile of ventures has decreased over the year, has roughly shown you a decrease of 20% in their stock price as compared to early last year. Only the top 10% of ventures increased by roughly 100%. Above all, it was G Medical Innovations, an Australian venture that exited again the penny stock side and increased by more than 4,000%. On an annual basis, however, we're talking about penny stocks here, and therefore this has been such a strong one. However, Basecare Medical, for instance, a Chinese venture, went down by 77%, and this was the weakest performing stock last year. So there was lots of hype about new ventures listing, but when you look into most of the ventures that went public last year, the majority of them actually lost in value over the year. So we do see that there's not yet the response from the public side as we see the response from the private side of pouring so much funding into digital health ventures. The public still has to catch up on the similar hype. Okay, so before I deep dive a bit further into some of the categories here, a bit cumulative funding that we've seen year on year, Q2 has been significantly stronger. The entire first half has been significantly stronger as compared to the last year. That was here in 2020, first and second quarter. I believe you all remember it was a very interesting first half year with the pandemic roughly hitting every single market. And so it was quite expected that the funding would increase on a quarter-on-quarter comparison on an annual basis here. The last two quarters were actually weaker as compared to the previous two, as compared to the previous year. This is largely driven since these two quarters were so weak. Quarter 3 and 4 has been significantly stronger, and therefore they have outpaced them. But we have now for a third quarter in a row exceeded the $2 billion mark, showing that there's a strong response of investors into digital health as well. On a global scale, with North America increasing so strongly in terms of value, the funding that has been deployed in Asia Pacific dropped down to only 18% on a global scale, considering that we've seen such a strong growth in North America. On a quarter-on-quarter comparison, actually since Q3 last year, we've seen a major increase in funding as compared to the previous quarters. This also shows that the average funding size now has increased to $35.7 million per deal, which is significantly stronger as what we've seen in pre-pandemic. So anything that happened post or during and post the pandemic now, or we're still in the pandemic, pandemic, has been significantly stronger as what we've seen before. So it could either continue going as strong as we see it right now, or we might see at some point that the market is going to take a step back and we see a drop in funding again. So we will see what 2022 is going to bring us. In terms of where investment is getting deployed, when you look into South Asia and China, you see that the majority of the value is getting deployed in late stage deals. So here Series D and beyond, both representing more than 50%. Versus when you look into Southeast Asia, here the majority of the funding is still deployed in Series C, B, and A deals, so significantly earlier as compared to what we see in South Asia and China. However, with a more maturing of the markets, especially in Northeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia, we will see that also this pipeline moves up, and we see that the value share of late stage deals will correspond significantly stronger to the total funding that is invested in these sub-regions. Okay, when we look into digital health, we are generally at the moment classifying ventures in 17 clusters. These are all of the categories that we're currently assigning. A venture can sit in one or multiple categories, and therefore we can kind of build this nicely neural network between ventures into where they're sitting, what solutions are they providing, to whom are they providing it to. When we now look into some of the top venture clusters in Asia Pacific, health management solutions and telemedicine are still the most advanced ones here, with 370 and 310 ventures respectively, followed then by medical diagnostics, wellness, and patient solutions. This doesn't really correspond to what we see across the funding that is getting deployed. So while health management solutions and telemedicine are the most represented categories in terms of venture numbers, in terms of funding, online marketplaces and medical diagnostics are representing the largest deals here, representing the largest categories here. So when we look into some of them, let me actually now change a bit over here. When we look into some of these categories, and now I enter into health tech IFA, so medical diagnostics, for instance, the ventures of how they are looking in there have actually been growing quite significantly over the years as well. So in 2017, we only had about 230 ventures. Now in 2022, there's a much comparison here. We are now at roughly 280 ventures. This is an increase of about 4% on a 5-year CAGR comparison. So we saw a very strong increase. When you look into the funding actually increased by about 50%, 6-month to 6-month comparison. When you look into what some of these ventures are solving, then you start understanding why there's so much funding actually flowing in there. So oncology represents 123 ventures. Oncology research generally requires lots of funding in order to validate your product solution, and therefore we see lots of funding actually floating into the oncology side. The women's healthcare side is getting stronger, especially since last year. We've seen that everything around femtech, gynecology has seen a major pickup. So we see more solutions also in the diagnostic side from here, especially around the fertility side. And neurology is also a very strong field, especially around the medical imaging side here. And this is why we've seen these categories basically representing the lion's share. Ventures are not just within the medical diagnostic space that are within the category, that are within the cluster. Sometimes they're also representing others. So for instance, they are providing 2 solutions. So here, for instance, including health management solutions. In Asia Pacific, ventures that are within this category are still fairly immature. So we don't see many ventures that are exceeding, let's say, 50 employees and above, showing that the ventures are probably between their Series A, B stage. Only once they are then exceeding these funding stages, you see that they're also ramping up in terms of headcount. China is still the most representative country here, representing 104 ventures out of them. And we saw that the funding has been quite strong. However, as compared to the previous year, we actually saw quite a major decrease year on year as a comparison. The majority of the deals that are happening within the space are still early stage funding. So we saw 265 deals in the past 5 years, and these are all still very early, less than $1 million that have been invested. And when you want to understand what companies are very active within the field, so you've seen, for instance, that there are lots of partnerships happening. However, in the medical diagnostic space, especially the academia side is very, very strong. Pharma and biotech, however, represent now roughly 8% of the entire partnerships that we've seen. Very active within the side are also tech firms. So NVIDIA, for instance, partners very often with medical imaging companies in order to deploy their solution within theirs. AstraZeneca is a very strong firm within the space as well, but you also see some of the hospitals, for instance, being quite actively involved in there. In terms of investors, when you look into their top 10 investors are also primarily based, here's for instance China, but also within India, for instance, or this one is Korea. So you also see that the some of the investors that are much more active within the space, like here Metrics Partners China, invested 11 times within ventures in the medical imaging space. When we look into, let's say, online marketplaces, we are seeing a very similar, development here. Looking into the charts here again, funding year-on-year comparison, for instance, we've seen that last year has been significantly stronger, outpacing 2020 by more than 2x. So that was quite a strong development. Considering that this is a B2C solution, we've also seen that some of the funding amounts here are significantly stronger. Ventures raising faster, larger amounts. Therefore, the comparison here as compared to what we've seen for medical diagnostics might be very different to one another. Okay, looking into some of the therapeutic focus areas here, we are currently tracking 85 distinct therapeutic focus areas. Some of them are stronger represented, some of them are less strong represented. Oncology still exceeds most of them, here with roughly $1.2 billion invested, followed by cardiovascular with $1.05 billion of investments. This has been a decrease in terms of oncology. It has been a major increase for cardiovascular that went up by 1.7x as compared to the previous year. Gynecology actually showed the largest increase, growing by 4.6x as compared to 2020. This is driven by the this is largely driven by the attention that it got also from the ecosystem. Everyone kind of starts looking into the femtech gynecology side of it. I can do the same here. So let's focus a bit more also on some of the ventures that we see within, and then we can do a deep dive on them as well. Cardiovascular here now. Some of the ventures that are very active within the side is, for instance, here Opvio, Shukun, Bioformis, as some of you might know, but also very strongly represented with Chinese ventures here with Janko, Weimai, Medlinka, all providing some sort of solutions within the cardiovascular space. Let's do a bit of let's, for instance, take Shukun as an example. Just to showcase to you what such ventures are basically providing out there. So Shukun, for instance, Chinese venture headquartered in Beijing, here is very much active in the medical imaging space. Medical imaging is quite a growing cluster at the moment. We can see how many ventures are in there at the moment. However, they're also providing an HCP education solution that is at the backbone of their medical imaging platform. We are generally tracking who are the key team members, but also how does their funding here develop. So when you look into Shukun here, for instance, we look into the funding year on year, it's actually has quite a strong money index here, showing with an 85.6. So as compared to their competitors providing similar solutions out there, they're actually outperforming. Also in terms of the total funding that they have raised here between the third quartile and the top 10%, they have a total funding of $305.56 million. This is way beyond the third quartile of what all ventures within this particular area are actually raising. In terms of the valuation as well, and we are giving a very objective point of view about valuation of ventures, they're sitting nicely at the upper third quartile here with $830 million versus the third quartile generally goes under $104 $1.04 billion, but starting at $484 million. By the way, as I said before, it's quite an expanding category. So in total, we have currently 367 ventures that are active within the medical imaging space. So it's quite a strong ecosystem. When you look into some of their partnerships, and this is where it becomes quite interesting, they're actually extremely strong in partnering with institutions and universities out there, so hospitals and universities. This is why also their innovation score is significantly high. However, considering that they are not so much working with biopharma or insurance firms, their market score is a bit lower as compared to some of the other ventures out there. Looking into some of the stats overall and how they're developing, there's also a momentum here. This basically looks into the point at the moment, how strong and innovative are they within the market. With a 50.7, they are at the center of it. It's not necessarily strong. However, if you take the aggregate and you look into the overall maturity of the venture, they're at an 83.6 IFR score. This is within the top 10% of all ventures that we currently track within the platform. Looking into some of their competitors, some that are providing very similar solutions out there. Here we are comparing ventures on 160 data points to one another, and then comparing it on the similarity score between them. Can be the products that they're providing within the market. It can also be the partners that they have, the funding that they're currently in, which city they're in. So here, as compared to AirDoc is 76.8% similar to them, at a score that is a bit lower as compared to Shukun. Here in Vision, 74%. I generally say anything that is above 75 to 80% is very, very similar. Anything that goes below is not as similar anymore. So you do see that they have certain similarities. AirDoc also provides a cardiovascular solution. However, Shukun, with their focus on many more diseases out there, still has a very unique value proposition out there. When you look into some of the regulatory approvals of what they have, so here, for instance, they have one. They have an FDA approval in the US for their coronary doctor solution, medical imaging software that they've received about 1 year and 2 months ago. Some of their other products out there still don't have a regulatory approval, but you can basically find most of their solutions also within here. So in case you're looking for something in particular, you can generally find these solutions here as well. Okay, cool. Let's go back to the presentation, then we can deep dive into some of the other areas as well. When we look, this is what I was just showing you. We can also look into Harrison for a moment, Australian venture that have raised quite a significant amount of funding last year. Again, here, they have a diagnosis tour. They're active within the fertility and gynecology space. They've raised $91.9 million last year. This has been one of the stronger candidates in Australia that was driving the overall pipeline. They are providing a diagnostics tool called Annalise. It's basically supporting chest X-ray solutions on the market. Okay, going back here. Okay, from a noteworthy side, before I start answering a couple of your questions, we've seen very interesting partnerships out there. As I was saying before, we've seen 500 plus partnerships in Asia PAC over the past years. Some picks from our last year. GSK started working with WeDoctor in order to market some of their solutions within the Chinese market. FWD Insurance announced a partnership with Halodoc in Indonesia in order to provide better services to their customers there. Halodoc, in case you're not familiar with, are driving the digital health pipeline in Indonesia by working with the Ministry of Health, but they have also been extremely involved in vaccinating the entire country through drive-through points last year. LPixel partners with Canon. It's also not a surprising partnership. LPixel is providing a medical imaging solution. Canon is very active within the camera side. What they're looking is into deploying their solution straight into cameras provided by Canon to physicians. We've seen that tech firms have been particularly active here. Intel, for instance, also partnered with Lunit, similar solution to LPixel, also medical imaging. And Plano, the winner of our last year's most innovative digital health venture, announced a very strong partnership with Huawei. Plano is providing an ophthalmology solution for children, Singapore-based venture. Okay, in case you're interested in a bit more finding about Health Tech Alpha, it's an open platform now. So to a certain extent, you can start using and exploring the entire platform. You can start creating a bit of your dashboard and can see what we are basically also using for our day-to-day work. Okay, let me answer a couple of questions that we might have in here. Feel free to drop some more in here. Oh, there's been a poll. Okay, let's wait for a few minutes. Also, before we start jumping into that, we will have a few other sessions over the next few weeks. So in case you're interested in the European digital health ecosystem, you can find the same there as well. We will be doing an in-depth webinar on North America and on Europe, the ecosystem. You can find all of the 4 reports under our research sites. Let me probably go quickly back to Health Tech Alpha for one more point. So in case you have an account and you would like to find any of the research that we have, you can basically always find them within the research site here. You find all of the reports that I have just shared with you as well, and all of the other ones as well. In case there's the question, how are we gathering data? It's our value proposition that we bring to the market. So we are tapping at the moment into more than 30 languages that are providing information about digital health solutions. And you then look, for instance, into some of the ventures, and let's see if there's actually, for instance, a news attached to that one here. What we are doing is we are providing natural language processing on investment deals or on partnership deals. These are generally getting picked up from the system, then interpreted. We are doing language extraction and a content extraction of that, extrapolate our algorithm over it, and basically feeding the information back into the system. The better a venture is performing, the higher the scores are going. So this is our proprietary algorithm that we've developed over the past years. What we are looking at the moment into momentum, market innovation, and money. And a score that we have recently shared that has been recently launched is our team score. It's not available for all ventures yet, as the system is still verifying data. But once this is available, you also see a team strength here. Team strength is looking into the past experience of the leadership team within the digital health space, as well as from where they've graduated, how often have they published research that corresponds to the work that they are doing now, as well as many other points that are basically feeding into a team score that is part of a new set of algorithms that we are launching this year to even provide you with better insights into how the ecosystem develop overall. Here again on the regulatory side, maybe since I'm on bioformers and I know the venture quite well, we are not just looking into FDA approvals, we also look into registrations, we look into CE markings. This can be either in Germany and Spain and France, etc. So you always see from where the CE marking actually comes from, as well as we are tapping into the DIGA databases, the Canadian registry, into lots of the Scandinavian regulatory partner into the regulatory databases, and we are basically aggregating all of the data within so that you have a better insight about what is happening within the market. Okay. If there are no more questions out there, then we can complete this webinar for today. The next webinar will be next week around the North America ecosystem, if I'm not mistaken. So until then, I wish you all a great afternoon or morning and hope to see you next time. Thank you.